Hello YouTube. Today I am doing a response video to why I am not a libertarian. Let's get into it.
I have always found it quaint and rather touching that there is a movement, libertarians, in the US that thinks Americans are not yet Christopher Hitchens. I'm fairly certain that a fair proportion of you, my subscribers, consider yourself libertarian, and so with this in mind, I invite you to reply to what I have to say on this topic below in the comments. If you think my following reasons are insufficient, please let me know, as I appreciate that I might just be missing something, and if I am, I want to know it. Anyhow, to explain why I'm not a libertarian, it stands to reason that I begin by describing what exactly libertarianism is, right? And so here's an attempt to stillman it. Likewise to all political philosophies, libertarianism represents a wide array of movements and beliefs, but all are predicated on the core principle of liberty. Now, what exactly liberty means depends on the libertarian, as traditional libertarians sought to abolish capitalism and private property, while contemporary libertarians advocate laissez-faire capitalism and strong private property rights. But a fair summation of all libertarians is that they seek maximum freedom of the individual and minimum authority of government. As such, they tend to insist upon freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to bear arms, freedom of and from religion, freedom of the press, freedom of ownership, freedom of the economy, and they almost always oppose the welfare state and taxation, which they see as a form of slavery. Or as the American Libertarian Party puts it, we hold that all individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion.
So, already he's made a bit of a mistake, which is he introduced the concept of left libertarianism and right libertarianism, but now he's just talking about right libertarianism, because left libertarians would not object to the welfare state, at least not within the context of our present society. The left libertarians support socialized medicine, at least in the context of our present society. Maybe their ideal society is different. So, I mean, very minor mistake anyway. So there's nothing really to do with the whole issue.
Dominion over their own lives and have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they do not forcibly interfere with the equal rights of others to live in whatever manner they choose. Now that sounds pretty damn reasonable, right? Penn Jillette and Michael Shermer seem to think so.
But I voted libertarian for many years now.
I've leaned libertarian most of my life since college.
As does Ron Paul.
They said the role of government ought to be but one thing: protect liberty. That's the purpose of government.
Clint Eastwood.
And now you have called yourself a libertarian, is that right? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, libertarian values, that's where Republicans used to be when they were saving money and everything.
And according to libertarian websites, Keanu Reeves, Chris Rock, Vince Vaughn, Will Wheaton, Matt Groening, and countless more. And so why doesn't it convince me? Well, what follows is my three primary reasons. This is why I'm not a libertarian. One of the most eloquent and convincing summations of the libertarian philosophy that I've ever heard of comes from Walter Edward Williams, who in his book titled All It Takes Is Guts wrote the following. But let me offer you my definition of social justice. I keep what I earn and you keep what you earn. Do you disagree? Well then, tell me how much of what I earn belongs to you and why. And so, what's my answer? Why do I think that strangers are entitled to some of Walter's fruit? Well, to put it bluntly, Walter fell out of the right vagina at the right time. He inherited a biological and/or socio-economic advantage that he did not earn, and thus he does not deserve all of the fruit of his labour. He was dealt good cards. Now, Walter...
Okay, I think this argument's mistaken on two grounds. The first being, so is everybody else, at least in the polity that's going to tax me. Everybody in North America, in the global West, was tremendously lucky to be born here. And it really doesn't matter if you were born lower class or upper class. In my opinion, yeah, you might have some advantages being upper class, but look, in Canada, anybody can go to university, can pursue any career if they have the capabilities. For example, my sister put herself through college pretty much just by waitressing, and went on to work in the radio industry, get a very solid career. We were from a very humble background, raised by a single mother on welfare. So, in fact, to some degree, it's harder when you're rich because, poor people are used to having to hustle, so they have that hustle mentality, and they have more respect for money. If you're just sort of handed stuff on a silver plate your whole life, then you might not become as useful and as productive. And I'm not saying it's better to be born poor or anything, but I think that from the perspective of being able to go and get what you want, there is, and from being sort of a better person, there is some advantage to coming from a background without me, or at least from parents that try to instill a work ethic in you. Furthermore, even if I did come from a privileged background, that doesn't really justify the state taking my money, because that's just going to the political class who are already quite privileged. Sure, if the state was Robin Hood and they were taking from the rich to give to the poor, that would be one thing. But the vast majority of government spending doesn't really go to the poor. It goes to state monopoly services, to the political class, to the salaries of bureaucrats, to the salaries of politicians, to pay off to special interests. And social mobility works both ways. Somebody could have been born in a very privileged situation and still end up in the gutter. And what, do they still owe when they're down there? Because that's what your theory says, that it's based on how you're born. One of the things I like about the market economy is it's a meritocracy. If you work hard, you hustle, you invest the money you make instead of consuming it, then you get further ahead. If you're indolent, if you're lazy, if you don't work, then you suffer. And that's sort of the way it has to be in order for society to function. I mean, if we want to have this high standard of living that we have, people have to work 40, 50 hours a week producing stuff. Ergo, if you don't spend any time producing stuff, you don't get to consume anything.
Came from a broken family in a relatively racist country, and so how the hell can I say that he had an advantage? Well, for him, it's got more to do with nature than nurture, and to explain why, let me rewind a bit. In 1971, the American political philosopher John Rawls wrote a theory of justice, and within it, he, as many of you likely know, observed that when people contemplate and determine the structure and rules of society, they do so selfishly, based on their personal circumstances, characteristics, and preferences, such as their mental and physical abilities, social status, ethnicity, gender, and, most crucially, their conception of what's good. Thus, it's no surprise that some people who can afford the bare basics, such as shelter and food, want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay towards other people's bare basics. Likewise, it's no surprise that some people who can afford to pay for their family's medical bills want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay towards strangers' medical bills. Just as it's no surprise that some people who can afford to send their children to school want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay for other people's children to go to school, and so on and so forth. But the only reason...
Bastiat preempted you 300 years ago, bro. The state is that great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. It doesn't even really make sense in the first place. Like the average household income. The average household income in Canada is like $100,000. Okay, and I don't know. Maybe you're from somewhere else. Maybe you're from Eastern Europe, but in the context of developed Western democracies, places like Canada, Western Europe, the United States, almost everybody, every family can afford to pay for their own health care, education, housing, etc. They're all making, like $100,000 a year. I wish I was. I'm not. But most families are. Usually that's two incomes, right? So that could be $50,000 a year, which, I mean, it's not even that much. That's like $20 an hour or something. A little more than minimum wage, or minimum wage, but you hustle and you work the extra overtime, right? Now, sure, there are some families that are below average. Well, half of them, mathematically, assuming we're talking, well, it depends. I mean, what type of average you're using. We're talking median here, so could well be more than half families are under average because you have a few, big earners that are pulling things up. Doesn't really matter. Not really material. My point being that basically every family can, or the majority of families, let's say 70-80%, can pay all of their own stuff. So it doesn't really make sense, in my opinion, to argue for state-provided education, state-provided healthcare, on the basis of some people won't be able to afford it. If that's the case, which maybe it is, we should look at providing healthcare and education for those people who can't afford it. The rational argument in favor of government healthcare and government education is that it does a better job than the market would. Because, as I said, most of the families can afford their healthcare and their education because they're making, $100,000, $70,000, even $60,000, you can still probably afford it. You might have to cancel the Disney Plus subscription. Junior might have to pick up some shifts at McDonald's. Anyway, here's my point. It's not free. It's not free healthcare. It's not free education. And I know that leftists know that free is just a euphemism for government provided. But his argument is that people don't want to pay for other people's healthcare and education. Well, mostly they won't be, right? Because most people can afford their own. So mostly they'll be paying for their own. And maybe a few people, let's say 20%, which I think is actually pretty high. But maybe, all the people on welfare, who knows. 20% can't. So they're paying for their own, plus they're paying their percentage towards that 20%. I mean, first of all, of course you don't want to pay for other people's stuff. That's just obvious. Our own stuff is expensive enough. Why should we pay for somebody else's? Nobody else is paying for ours. Like, that's just basic common sense. You take care of your own. Yeah, I don't want to be somebody else's bitch. I mean, duh. But any serious argument in favor of socialized medicine and socialized education has to be that it provides better results than a market system. And I don't see how that could possibly be the case. We know that state monopolies are inefficient. We know that market competition ensures that firms compete on quality and price. And we see this all the time. There's countless examples where the private sector does a better job than government. I'll give one right now, which very common in more developing countries is water. You cannot drink the water here in Manila, but for 30 pesos, a guy will bring me 5-gallon jug, which is like $1 of really primo quality drinking water. So that's the market outcompeting the state, providing a better quality product than the state. And yeah, it's more expensive. I pay maybe 500 pesos a month for all the government water I use for bathing and dishes and whatnot. But the private water is much better quality.
It's because of their lucky circumstances. They've been dealt good biological as such, they stand to lose a card or two should society attempt to equalise the hands of those less fortunate. Now, to get around this prejudice, Rawls proposed what he called the original position, and argued that a just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you'd be willing to enter it in a random place. He reasoned that if people determined the basic structure of society behind a veil of ignorance, which would deprive them of information about their specific characteristics such as their ethnicity, social status, and gender, they would create a welfare state. They'd elect a society that maximizes the prospects of the worst off, because they themselves might be the worst off.
Well, to begin with, I challenge that idea that a welfare state maximizes the prospect of the worst off. After all, a welfare state's very expensive, and so that's going to incur a lot of taxes. Okay, we've got a progressive tax system. Most of those taxes are paid by high-income earners, although not all. I mean, everybody's paying the sales tax, which we have in Canada. Now they got a carbon tax. There's different little eco taxes. In Canada, we've got a fairly large welfare class. Around 6 to 7% of the population under 65 receives Ontario Works or ODSP, which is disability pay in Ontario. So that's a substantial amount of the population, and that tax burden is paid by people who are working. All told, social protection costs about, as of 2020, about 190 billion a year in Canada, which is close to 10% of our GDP. Well, that money doesn't come out of thin air. Ultimately, it's paid for by taxes. And this creates an invisible lack. That is, if we hadn't spent 190 billion or 200 billion on the social safety net in this year, that wealth would have gone elsewhere. And a lot of it might have gone to the market economy, to creating more jobs, more businesses, more economic opportunities, which also help people get out of poverty. In fact, a good job is going to get you out of poverty much quicker than any welfare program would. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sympathetic to people with lower income, and I recognize that these programs do help people in times of need. I think the goal of ensuring that all people have equal access to quality education and healthcare is a laudable goal. But I think the method by which we're trying to achieve it is fundamentally broken. Take, for example, public education. What sort of monster could be opposed to public education? Well, what sort of monster favors a monolithic, centralized model where there's no innovation, there's no change, you're just stuck in a stagnant system that's not improving, that can't improve by definition? Now, contrast that to a market economy where entrepreneurs are constantly trying to improve and build the better mousetrap. And I think you'd see that if we had different firms competing to provide the best schooling experience to our child, that the results would be much, much better. They could try radical approaches to class size. They could try strict discipline, kicking out any problem students, say you're gone from the school, something that public schools might not always be able to do. They could adopt more student-directed learning pathways. They could experiment with extremely cost-effective approaches. You know, you take one teacher, put them in a room with 4 students, give them the internet, Khan Academy, and, you know, maybe you could see miracles happen the public school system, you've got all these bureaucrats and wasted paper and ink, and what's the carbon footprint on that behemoth? I mean, you're paying all these administrators and extra staff, and half the time you need police in there because of the gangs. The public school system has just failed. It has just failed. And there is a better option, and that is the market economy. That is firms competing and not being forced to stick to one centralized monolithic model. You know, not every school in the country should be the exact same. They should try different methods and see what works. And you can't tell me that somehow these guys have stumbled upon the perfect pedagogical, is that the right word? Pedagogical methodology. You know, people learn very well when they're active and engaged. And maybe we shouldn't have so much focus on rote memorization. Students cram for tests, and then they forget everything that they tried to stuff in there. I mean, maybe we should look into vocational training at an earlier age, get people sort of moving towards the workforce so they're not just falling off this cliff when they're 18, you know, and then out on their own and no idea how to pay taxes. So if I'm an individual behind this veil of ignorance, I'm not sure that I want a society with high taxes and a big-ass welfare state. What I really want is economic opportunity. I want the ability to work hard and earn a good salary and move up in the world. And the other thing we want is wages to increase for the lowest paid workers. Obviously, you know, the people who are at the top in society, the high income earners, the wealthy, they're doing fine, and that's good, you know. I have no problem with that. Especially when it's the case, you know, they're doctors or businessmen, entrepreneurs that got their lofty position by working hard, you know, or they inherited the wealth of somebody who created a lot of wealth, worked hard. I have no problem with that. You know, that's okay. They're fortunate. Their good fortune doesn't come at my expense. You know, that's nonsense. It's not like there's a fixed pie of wealth to be divvied out in society. Wealth is created through production, through the productive activities of individuals working in consort in a company or a project like that. So the main thing I would want is just the opportunity to be able to participate in the workforce. And that's not really what the social safety net, what the welfare state does. Really, what a lot of it does, especially with socialized medicine and socialized healthcare, which is where the bulk of the money goes, is forces everybody in society into the less efficient socialist system rather than allowing the market economy to work, even though the vast majority of people in society have no problem being able to pay their own way. I mean, it's very confusing to me when advocates of the welfare state, when socialists say, oh, but what about the poor? We have to have public education and public health care because some dude who's down on his luck, unemployed, might not be able to pay. What sense does it make to design the whole system for all of society around this one edge case? When you could just say, okay, you can't pay, you know, whatever. So he gets a bad debt that he writes off, you know, probably not the first time with Buddy here. What's the problem, you know? So he goes to a free clinic for charity. I mean, why should we be designing society around the edge case instead of around the normal case and looking for the optimal result for most people?
that would ensure that if they or their loved ones were born blind, deaf, or dumb, they'd nevertheless have a life worth living. Thus, this is the primary reason I'm not a libertarian. Despite the fact that I came from a broken family and had a very rough upbringing, I am extremely lucky to have the characteristics that I do. And while I've worked extremely hard to get where I am, I did not earn the temperament, patience, charisma, and, if you will, intellect that I have. I was simply dealt good biological cards. Thus, I'm convinced that some of the fruit of my labour should go to those less fortunate, and that the same is true of Walter's fruit.
That's fine. That sounds like a good argument for charity to be. But that doesn't mean we should have high taxes. Where's that money going to go? You think it's going to go to the people who were not born without your charisma and intellect, such as it may be? That's not where the money's going to go. That money's going to go to the political class, to the politicians, to the bureaucrats, to the special interests, to the wealthy backers of the politicians. Why do you think they give them, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to run their political campaigns? Do you think they care about the politics? It's because they're going to make 10 times that in government contracts, in special interest payments, in sole source contracts, in patronage. I mean, the whole system's a scam, which is why they have to use coercion to obtain the revenue in the first place. Because nobody would voluntarily pay into that grift.
In a post titled How to Lose Readers Without Even Trying, which admittedly makes me a little nervous about my releasing this video, put Rawrs' original position this way. Many of my critics pretend they have been entirely self-made. They seem to feel responsible for their intellect.
We all stand on the shoulders of giants, okay? We didn't invent the English language. We didn't build this wonderful society that we were born into. But that's as true of the less productive members of society as the more productive. You don't have to be lucky to be able to work. Anybody can work, especially if there was no barriers to entry like the minimum wage, Pretty much anybody can work. Unless you're a paraplegic, even if you're in a wheelchair, you're a wheelchair person, well, you could still work a telephone job. You could still do telesurveys. Especially, work from home is becoming more of a thing. That's the beauty of the modern capitalist economy, is it makes people more productive even if they do have some challenges, some disabilities. And again, it's not like you pay taxes and this money goes to the unlucky people. They don't get anything out of your tax dollars, or they get very little. It's almost all going to the political elite.
Intellectual gifts for their freedom from injury and disease.
So why do people like Rawls come up with these theories? It's because intellectuals play a very important role in the modern state system. They are the intellectual bodyguards of the state. They get lucrative positions in universities where they have to spend like 4 hours a week teaching, and the rest they can just wax poetic about whatever. But their primary purpose is to provide a justification for the state, for taxation, for wealth redistribution. That's what they do. That's their real job, and they get paid well for it.
They were born at a specific moment in history. Many appear to have absolutely no awareness of how lucky one must be to succeed at anything in life, no matter how hard one works. One must be lucky to be able to work. One must be lucky to be intelligent.
I don't think that's really true. I mean, pretty much anybody can work hard and succeed. Even if you're, you have a very basic job like a dishwasher, or you're working in a call center. I mean, even if you're making like $12, $13 an hour, you could easily work 50, 60 hours a week, especially a call center. It's not that hard. And you could save up a lot of money pretty quickly and do anything you want with it. Start your own business. If you abstain from consumption and you save, I mean, let's do the math, okay? Let's say you're making $15 an hour. You work 40 hours. That's $600. Okay, you work another 20 hours at 22. That's 4. That's 1,000. You're grossing 55,000 a year. Okay, the government's going to take a chunk out of that, but pretty much anybody can just work really hard and succeed. You save 15,000 a year here in your 20s. You invest that in the stock market. You do that for a decade, and you would be well on your way to being quite wealthy, despite making minimum wage, just because you worked really, really hard. I'm not saying you have to do that. Most people don't, and that's fine. There's other things in life besides working. We don't all have to kill ourselves at our jobs just to save up some money, And a lot of people make a lot more than that, too, $15 an hour. So I'm just saying pretty much anybody could work like a dog, just work hard and save money and get pretty rich, even on a relatively low salary. That's the beauty of the modern capitalist system.
To not have cerebral palsy or to not have been bankrupt in middle age.
And if the government wasn't robbing these guys in the first place, it'd be even easier, right? Why does a guy making $15 an hour have to pay any taxes? If the whole point is to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor, the guy making $15 an hour is probably the poor, so why are you taking his money? Because the point is not to redistribute money from the rich to the rich to the poor. The point is to redistribute wealth from the economic class, including both rich and poor, including workers and capitalists and businessmen, to the political class, to the guys, the Laurentian elite, the guys in the nice suits in Ottawa, the political elite, and the special interests that back them.
By the mortal illness of a spouse. Many of us have been extraordinarily lucky, and we did not earn it. Many good people have been extraordinarily unlucky, and they did not deserve it. And yeah, I get the distinct sense that if I asked some of my readers why they were not born with club feet or orphaned before the age of 5, they would not hesitate to take credit for these accomplishments.
Yeah, this
anyway,
guy's a
moving on,
downer.
the second reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in natural
We're only on reason 2? Oh my god.
rights, which I would argue is the very bedrock of libertarianism.
Damn straight it is. Who are you to argue with St. Thomas and Aquinas? An unjust law is no law at all. Absolutely natural rights exist. We can determine simply through the use of our reason there are things that you should not do because they're bad, because we don't want them to happen to us. You shouldn't go around smacking people in the head. That's just obvious, okay?
If it was
If you've ever been smacked in the head, you would know it sucks. So you know not to do it to somebody else. Like, this is not a complex chain of reasoning here.
then all of morality would come down to arbitrary private contracts and libertarian
What? What is your basis for that? What are you talking about? Natural rights are rights that exist naturally, without any contract or any... It's just rights that we have, like the right to our person and property, the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to live our lives as we see fit, so long as we're not aggressing against anybody else or using their property without their permission, etc.
Certainly don't believe that this is the case. They hold that we are born with certain inalienable rights, namely life, liberty, and, in most cases, property. But I see absolutely no justification for this.
What?
Many libertarians, such as John Locke, insist that these rights are God-given, that we have the right to liberty because God said so. But I, as an atheist, obviously don't find this convincing. And what's more, even if I was a Christian like Locke, I'd still reject his assertion, as in my opinion, the Bible explicitly states that it's perfectly fine to deprive certain people of liberty. While other believers in natural rights, though not strictly libertarian, such as Immanuel Kant, insist that natural rights are derived from reason alone, that, in Kant's case, they're categorical imperatives. But I reject this because I don't believe any action is non-contingent, and I'll likely explain exactly why in a future video, rather than needlessly cluttering this one. And so to those of you who are libertarian
So you're just not going to substantiate your point?
and non-religious, I'd like to ask a question. What makes you think we're born with natural rights?
I'll be glad to answer that. Simply by our experience in our lives and the application of reason, we can derive or infer some very simple rules like don't hurt other people or take their stuff, because we realize that society functions better if people don't do that, and because we ourselves may have become victim of theft or assault and did not enjoy the experience, or we may have witnessed other people being victimized by theft or assault and they did not enjoy the experience. I mean,
part of the state of nature possibly yields the right to liberty. Sure, we're born free, but that doesn't mean we have the right to be free, does it? As it stands, I maintain that Thomas Hobbes got it right when he said that in the absence of a social contract, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And yes, I know that Hobbes believed in natural rights, but I find his argument to be inadequate, albeit practical. Again, I'll try and address this in a future video. The third reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in libertarian free will. On top of the fact that we're not responsible for the biological and socio-economic characteristics that we possess, I also don't think we're responsible, in the libertarian sense, for anything. I've discussed the illusion of free will in previous videos, and so...
this is an important argument, actually.
I won't repeat myself here, but in case you still believe in free will, and especially if it plays a role in your libertarian worldview, which I'd assume it must, please consider checking out said videos. If we're not responsible for our actions in the libertarian sense, which is to say, for example, if my being a YouTuber isn't entirely of my own volition.
I mean, the counter argument is we observe that we have free will. Is this just the greatest illusion or what? I mean, I make choices all the time, son.
Then how can I sincerely take credit for the fruit that it produces, let alone insist that I deserve them?
If you don't have free will, you can't do anything. Or you're going to do whatever you're going to do. I mean, if you don't have free will, then everything is pointless. It's just nihilism. Like, what is the point? We're just doing what we were supposed to do. We never had any choice in the matter. How do you condemn anybody for simply being a product of causation? I don't know. I can't really prove free will. Well, I don't think anybody could. But I choose to believe in it.
To use Rawlsian terminology, I might be entitled to most of the fruit, but I don't deserve them, and I certainly don't deserve all of them.
And how do you get from we don't have free will to the government's got to take my money? What's the reasoning there?
If we're deterministic entities,
I gotta tell you, I don't find any of these arguments very compelling. I guess maybe nobody expected I would, but I do. I like this guy though. Who is this? This is Rationality Rules, and yeah, he's got a lot of subscribers. I'm gonna subscribe, check out more of his stuff. Definitely very interesting. I don't agree with what he's saying, but something to think about anyway. All right, bud. I'm out.